Welcome back to Getting Personal with Compt, the show where we explore the latest trends and insights in employee benefits and company culture and get to the root of how we can make the workplace a little bit more human. I am your host, Lauren Schneider, and today I have with me Mari Sifo joining us. Mari is the Executive Vice President and Chief Human Resources Officer at Host Hotels and Resorts. Mari, thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me, Lauren. I'm really excited. I've been looking forward to this for some time.
Oh, me too, because you are a wealth of knowledge and information, especially as it relates to the hospitality industry. And I know we are going through just ups and downs and in the tech industry. There's layoffs seemingly happening everywhere, even outside of our industry. So my burning question for you, what is hot for employees in your industry right now? Like, are we all set? Are we good? Are we focused on employee benefits, or what is happening?
Yeah, are we all set? That's a loaded question, because you never feel like as soon as you say it, it's like you got to knock on wood because you never know what's happening in this crazy world. So I think the normal is that there is no normal and that we are constantly looking to adapt, try to anticipate because hospitality is so focused on the current economic environment, what's happening to people every day and what their everyday experiences are. I think it is a industry that really reflects what's happening in the world. So what's most dominant is people want to be safe and secure. They want to make sure that they have a stable job, that they have the flexibility that they need to take care of their family and home. They are looking to ensure that economically they can take care of themselves. So that is still what is core to people, is making sure that they can take care of themselves and thus they are able to help and serve others. I think beyond that, what really is the differentiator or how we've thought about it in the past is it is still around personalization, right? There is still every individual has their own story, they have their own priorities, and trying to find benefits, programs, culture that allows the person to thrive based on their current story and or what's happening with them is probably what's going to be our standard for, quite frankly, forever.
And I totally realize that even having a conversation about what benefits are people interested in is it comes from a place of privilege because there are so many people who are just worried about getting the hours that they need to get the paycheck they need to feed themselves and their families.
Yeah, so it's interesting because it is privilege, but it's a right. So you never want to you want to be thoughtful. It's not something that you take for granted, but you also look at different ways that you can support whatever it is. So you might not be able to provide the holistic. I mean, a part-time employee is a perfect example of you may not be able to provide all of the benefits, but what can you provide that a person can make the best decision with the best information they have due to their personal circumstance? So this is where knowledge is power, the ability to make choice and be aware to what's available to you beyond just kind of maybe your traditional notions of what benefits are.
So, what does this look like in practice, for example, right now for you in trying to determine what is realistic to offer people, what they actually want? I imagine it takes a lot of listening, but then also seeing what's out on the market and finding some kind of balance.
Yeah, we've always found that going straight to the horse's mouth, and maybe that's not a great example, but going directly to the people and asking them what's important to them rather than guessing, right? We can pick up all the trends and look at all the surveys and read all of the data that we want. But what's most important to me is that I understand what's most important to our people. So just last year, we did a benefit survey. We asked them, are you getting what you need? What's most important to you? Where are we missing, as far as those benefits are concerned? And it was very simple things around eyeglasses. There are some dental benefits. So, things that we were able to address immediately. We were in the middle of our negotiation cycle. Quite frankly, it was not a significant cost to us. It was just how we were packaging. That was it. How we were able to address those needs is we ask them. Now, what we always make sure that we do is once we ask them and we do it, we tell them and we remind them and remind them and remind them that we did it. And this is why we did it, so that there's no confusion. And quite frankly, just because it's important to one doesn't mean that it's important to all. So they need to know how we are making the decisions that we make. So communication is really important.
Was there anything that came out of that survey that was maybe surprising to you that you didn't expect to see?
I think that more and more we're getting closer and closer to the individual, right? So you always have your big themes, but we are now getting into very niche type benefits, right? So people who have children with extreme disabilities, or people who are dealing with very difficult caretaking situations, right? So it's not always a huge program that we can offer to be able to meet the needs of these employees. And so we have to think outside of the box of what can we offer them that will help meet their needs, but that will also not just be one program for such a small population of employees. So I think that is kind of our constant balance. Not that it was surprising, but we're privileged that our people share. They'll tell us their stories. They'll tell us what they're facing. And sometimes it's really, really hard to be able to support them through that, even sometimes how you want to as a human being based on your own limitations and restrictions. And so how do we address the parent who has a teenager that is looking to do a transgender surgery? How do I handle the employee who has a young child who is just not thriving in their current education setting, but they are limited based on what's available in their community? Or we have the individual who is dealing with a new diagnosis that they just weren't prepared for. So I can't create programs for every one of them. So how do I support them through their journeys?
The I think interesting piece here is that you'll run into people who will say, "Well, how is that the employer's responsibility?" But I know that there are so many HR people out there, and I say HR people just to lump everyone in a group, um, who are focused on building a culture of empathy and understanding where people want to show up to work. So, how do you, I guess, combat the naysayers?
Yeah, it is, there's, whose responsibility is it? You're absolutely right. It might not be quote unquote the employer's responsibility, or the government responsibility. And so I don't think it goes beyond who is responsible or who should be doing it versus what can we do. And if you think about it from a basic human element, it might not be, again, that we provide all the resources, but if I have access to information and or knowledge and or tools that can help you solve a problem, then why wouldn't I share those tools? Why wouldn't I give you that knowledge? And so I think it is more around the human to human exchange. And sometimes that falls under organizations, under corporations. We take different roles and we shift, but what is the greater good? And the watch out is that you don't do it to sacrifice something else, right? So my responsibility is to find the best for both the company and the employee. And you're always balancing that role to make sure that I am doing the best and looking in the best interest for both parties and making decisions on a case by case basis every time there's a potential conflict.
So, you mentioned that you do an employee survey, for example. How else do you find out about the things that people want, maybe what they need, or what you're hearing from your colleagues?
Yeah. The rumor mill is always a great place to go, right? It is. I remember, 20 years ago working in manufacturing, and the best source of knowledge was just walking around, knowing what's happening, keeping your pulse on things. So I think you have kind of your internal culture, the internal kind of noise that you may hear, things that are coming up. So you always have that. You always have to look at what others are doing, what others are facing. We find it very common where our population set might not represent everyone's population set, so we're benchmarking and then we're saying, if they experience this, what would we do, and anticipating what could happen and or concerns or issues that people may have before they have them. We're looking at industry standards, we're looking at global standards, we're looking at economics, all of these things, and then trying to put them together and say, where might that happen? A lot of scenario planning, just to think through and anticipate. I spend a lot of my time not necessarily thinking about today, but thinking about the future, thinking about the employees who I won't even see or know or touch. But how do I make sure that I am serving them in their best, at their best, even when I'm no longer in this role?
So, what's a good indicator that you are doing those things then, that you are serving them the best way that you can?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the a bit more lagging, but it's going to be your retention. Do people stay? Our average year of service is 13. I think that says a lot about people wanting to be here, and people being dedicated. We have a culture where we try to solve problems versus run away or avoid them, and so that helps us address them. We are a deeply caring organization. So that kind of sets our principles and guidelines for how we go. We look at how others perceive us within the industry, where people who are in our, what we call our value chain. So that could be multiple shareholders, stakeholders. What are they thinking, hearing, and saying about us, so that we know that we are on the right path, and or if we need to course correct.
I feel like you're in a really unique position, um, as so many people leaders, CHROs, VP of people, um, traditional HR roles are, where you have to balance what you know is good for the people and what is good for the company, and then somehow prove the ROI of a lot of things that might not have true numbers to them, but you can see the impact. So, this is such a loaded question. What do you do? Is there a secret sauce to this? Is it different for manufacturing versus hospitality versus any other industry? What have you learned?
Yeah, well, I do think that my background in manufacturing, it helps because we always start with looking at, yes, you're right. You have your basic, ROI, what's our return? And that usually actually is a pretty easy thing to figure out because you're talking dollars and cents. Where it becomes very, or more difficult is this kind of intangible, or what I've kind of grown up to think of as productivity improvements, right? So you're always looking at kind of this cost benefit analysis, and where do you get your returns and how do they show up? They could show up in less time off. They could show up in quicker hires. They could show up in productivity and how people are getting work done, process improvements, engagement. And so I think you always start with, what are my core hardline tangibles that I know I can easily measure and give me the financial benefit or gain that I can touch, see, and deliver on. Then you go to your intangibles and you start to break those out and define them from a productivity standpoint, where if I am gaining this, how do I translate that into value? And that value becomes translated based on who is looking to get that value, right? So for some stakeholders, if it's a manager, it might be around productivity. If it is a department head, it could be overall engagement and culture. So you have your different measures, and you quite frankly might shift and adapt them based on who's your stakeholder and what's most important to them. I think sometimes in HR, we've always kind of been, we operate under this kind of policy procedure guidelines. We don't like gray because gray equals risk and liability, but you have to learn how to translate that gray into something that is tangible and hard based on what's most important to those stakeholders. Not a magic bullet, but sometimes it helps you tell the story and connect. When other times it's just too hard because people are focusing on just the dollar.
Well, that's the human side of it all, right? Like human is inherently, I don't want to say messy because that sounds negative, but human is human. So you had also mentioned one of your indicators is the length that someone has stayed at the company, like 13 years. That's incredible. But you have so many different generations in the workforce now. So how do you plan or build a company culture or experience that helps the entry level person coming in now set themselves up for that 13-year long or 13 plus career?
Yeah. It's funny because one of the things that we've been brainstorming in our team is 13 years can be good or maybe not, right? Depends on your perspective and what's important to you. So it's something that we're proud of, but we also get that it may not resonate with everyone. Some people might not want to stay with the company for 13 years. And quite frankly, I never have. And so it's a balance between, okay, what's important is why do people stay? And it'll be up to you to choose whether or not you want to or not based on your own life needs. But at least I don't give you a reason to leave. And that's what's most important is that I'm not giving you an easy out. I'm making it hard. And then you're making that decision based on what is truly best for you, based on where you are in life, right? So there are some people who may decide, I want to move global. I want to go overseas. I want to raise my family in that environment. I think that this is a great place. But now I get to make this decision based on what's important, based on my values, not because I feel like I'm lacking or I'm not appreciated or I don't have the benefits or I can't take care of certain things. We try to clear that off the table where people can now make the best decisions. And then that's how you meet the generational differences. Because again, we like to bucket groups. We like to bucket data. We like to organize things in nice, neat sets. And there's no person who fits under one demographic, right? There's not one person who is just a millennial. They're going to be a millennial, and then they have to decide, well, under what gender norms do they prescribe to? What is their ethnicity? What are their experiences? And so all of those things say, while it's easy to generalize, and yes, there's a lot that we can learn, it still comes down to that one individual because you'll never be able to create a group that clearly defines one person without taking something else into consideration.
Knowing all of that and understanding how unique each person is in your company, what are your thoughts on all of these articles that come out that are like, this is what Gen Z wants in the workplace, or here's what you need to do for the boomers who are transitioning out?
They're nice to read. You always get some information. I typically, I'll take it back to, that population or group that they're talking to, and I say, what do you think? Is this what you want? People ask me sometimes some very common benefits that are, why don't you have X amount of ERGs or resource groups? And I talked to my team and I went to the employees and I said, hey, I'm wondering, should we have these groups? And, the feedback was actually, Mari, I think we're okay. We find that we get our outlets through this way, and we don't know if that's going to be a benefit for us if we establish another group. And that's not coming from the HR team. That's coming from the employees who would fit into that population group. So I love to read them. I think they are interesting. I usually find out something. And then I take it back and say, does it work? Does it not work? But it's certainly an interesting read.
So the learning is to just ask your people.
Yeah. Never take anything for granted. Just go and ask.
How have benefits and how they relate to your people changed over time, especially in the various industries that you've been in? Are people still concerned with 401k, pensions, as a foundational thing? Or are we actually looking at perks, quote unquote, that people want and are maybe transforming into things that are stickier?
Yeah. It is it's funny. I remember, let me not age myself, but I remember when there was the big question of, are people really going to take the high deductible health plans? And I remember sitting in rooms and phasing out pension plans and trying to shift people into, well, will they really understand 401k? And can we trust people to manage their own money? Shouldn't we be managing their money for them? And so it is the core, I think the core of life, I tell people all the time, is everything to me boils down to freedom. And I think that has been the evolution of benefits, is the control has gone from the corporation, from the government, or whoever, is the deemed interest based on what kind of industry or organization you're in. And we've pushed it to those individual people. And so more and more people have more control and more freedom, which is scary because that means that there is greater risk. And unfortunately, some of the liability is still on organizations, even when, employees have those greater risks. I think that the shift is the more people get to choose, the better. And whether or not you decide to call it a perk or a benefit or extra cash or reward or recognition or whatever it comes down, the only thing that people have ever asked for is freedom, right? The freedom to choose, the freedom to act, the freedom to do what they think is best for them. And then they live with the consequences of those actions. They want guidance. But I think benefits will continue to be about choice. That's why, and it's a struggle because you can't have 50,000 different, benefit plans and options. You have to kind of pick, I remember the cafeteria style plans where you kind of build your own and all of those things. And I think we're getting back to something like that, where allow me to choose what's most important to me, whether it be through perks and or certain programs or lifestyle programs, but that I can address my needs. And one more thing I wanted to say about the whole go ask people statement is you have to be prepared to say no. And so don't ask if you're not ready to make the tough decisions. And you have to be prepared to maybe hear things that you didn't want to. So, as much as it is really nice to say, go ask, let me tell you, I have gotten some requests that put me in some really difficult spots. But it's better to know than to not know. So, I guess I just wanted to put that cautionary tale. Don't go and ask people all of these things. You do nothing with it, or you're not prepared to make tough decisions when people maybe ask you for things that you can't always give.
Well, now you have to tell me what those things are that you had to say no to, that you were like,
People are, it's there are things like flex work and, like all, certain amounts of months off, or how do I do it? So it's the truth is it's not that people have asked me for really crazy things. I mean, people have asked me to give them like, well, today I want this benefit, but tomorrow I want that. So can you give me both? No. So there's some very practical things, nothing crazy, but I always have to think around consistency. I always have to think, if I give it to you, am I prepared to give it to all? And so that's where the tough decisions come. It's not that they're asking for crazy things, it's can I afford to do it if somebody else comes and asks me?
You also had mentioned that people just want freedom to do things. And I think that is so interesting, especially as someone who works in branding, where we are trying to figure out what the messaging is, what the positioning is. If we say give your people autonomy over their benefits, is that empowering for some leaders and way too scary for others?
Absolutely.
So, in that way, maybe it is scary, but is scary a good thing? What's your take?
Um, Fear will take you to places that you never thought you could go. So it is what you do with fear and how you manage it. We are in an overwhelmed society right now. Anxiety is off the roof. I saw Inside Out 2 the other day with my
Me too,
kids,
me
and
too. I was like, ooh, that's me, that's me.
right? And anxiety starts out really good, right? It helps you. You're proactive. You're anticipating until you cannot control for everything. And so the freedom isn't having all the choices, right? I think no one likes to make or having to choose between 20 options, right? I remember going to one presentation and it was actually kind of branding, but people want the freedom, but sometimes you just give them between choice A and B. Would you rather have steak or fish? Not choose from like 50 different items, right? So it's not that freedom means give me 1,000 choices. Give me the opportunity to make a choice. And you don't want to overwhelm them too much with too many choices at one time. So I think that is the balance.
That's a really interesting and good take when I think about what I've heard from so many other people leaders and then what I think of for myself as an employee. Like, I do appreciate the choice, but I don't want to have 1,000 different choices because then you have analysis paralysis and then it doesn't feel like a true benefit if I have to put work into figuring out what the benefit is.
Exactly. You don't want to be the benefits broker. You don't want to negotiate the rates. You don't want to see what's happening behind the scenes. But you do want to say, man, if this is happening this year, it would be really great if I had a lump sum amount and I could break it up between these three things instead of somebody just telling me I can only use it here. Right. So I think it's that's what freedom means to me. It is just um, not feeling like I don't have any option. I have no way out and I don't know what to do. It is around maybe there's a way I can figure it out. And there is some opportunity there. And might not be everything I need, but it can get me further than where I was.
I have one last question for you before we go. What is on the horizon for you? Whether that relates to employee benefits or something you're doing to build an impactful, more human culture.
Yeah, I think everything starts at the foundation around um, that human connection. And so we're spending a lot of time around impact. And I shift that word because I know we've always HRs talk about impacts of the organization. We're beyond seat at the table, the value that we're bringing. So it's beyond that, right? I think impacts of the organization is table stakes. You have to have it. You have to pay for yourself at some point in your function to make sure that you're contributing. But how do you connect the dots between all of it to say, how am I impacting the organization, people's lives, the communities that we work and serve in? Like, how am I making a bigger impact on the whole? And that means that there are puts and takes in different areas. But the question I always ask my team is, can we connect it? Can we pull it together? And what's our impact? And think about it from all perspectives and sides.
That is A fantastic way to end this episode. Mari, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Lauren. It's been a pleasure.
And if anyone else listening would like to be a guest on Getting Personal with Compt, please send me an email, lauren@compt.io, and we can talk about all of the very cool things and meaningful things that you're doing to just make the workplace a little bit happier, human, welcome, encouraging, empowering for your people.